Why are A1C goals different for older adults? Let's dive in. Welcome to the Geriatric Dietitian, your go to resource for nutrition that supports health, independence, and confidence in aging. I'm your host, Katie Dodd, registered dietitian and geriatric nutrition expert. Let's dive in. Hello, and thanks so much for watching this video. I recently had a video, Normal A1C Levels in Seniors, explained by a geriatric dietitian, go semi-viral. A lot of you have seen this video, and there was a lot of discussion in the comments. Some of the comments were, well, wait a minute, I'm an older adult, and these A1C levels you're talking about, that's a lot higher than what my doctor's telling me. In fact, that doesn't even seem healthy. Why are you even talking about this? So I want to do a follow-up video to explain in a little bit more depth on why A1C goals are different for older adults. Now, I will link below that video. It's like 15 minutes long if you want to watch it, but I'm also going to do a quick recap if you want to kind of get caught up to speed and you don't have to leave this video. So the first thing I will say, and I will always say this here on YouTube, is that this video is meant to be educational. It is not meant to be individualized medical advice. I always recommend that you talk to your own healthcare team about the best advice for you and your situation. So in this previous video, we were talking about some of the guidelines that are out there related to diabetes, and specifically a lab known as hemoglobin A1C or A1C. This is a lab, you go to the doctor, and it tells you what is your average blood sugar over a period of about 3 months. Now, this table here is really just for people in general, not specific to older adults, but this is how we are able to interpret A1C. Is someone normal, meaning they don't have diabetes? Are they in the pre-diabetes range, or do they have diabetes? So you can see here that if someone has an A1C of 6.5 or higher, they are typically in that diabetes range. Now, there are several things that go into the actual diagnosis of diabetes, because we do know that once someone is diagnosed with diabetes, there's a lot of things they can do to get their blood sugars under control and ideally have A1Cs much lower than this. Now, what I was sharing in the last video was this slide, and this is where things got interesting in the comments. This is from the American Diabetes Association, and these are A1C levels for seniors. Now, I'm going to walk you through this real quick, and then we'll kind of dive into the next section explaining this in a little bit more detail, and I will say I got some pictures that I hope explain things a little bit better. So when we're looking at this table, it's kind of breaking older adults down into 3 categories. And I think this is important because older adults technically is anyone over age 65. Age 65 to end of life, what a broad range. And every single person is so different based on genetics, how you live, your activity level, your diet, your individual medical conditions, medications you're on. There are so many different things that play a part that we can't really compare one older adult to another older adult. So with this table, we're looking at kind of categories of how we're looking at seniors. The first category is looking at a senior who's healthy. They have few chronic diseases. They are functionally and cognitively intact, and we expect they still have a long, good life ahead of them. So for them, their A1C goal is less than 7 to 7.5. And I do want to say less than, because I know a lot of you have A1Cs that are much less than that. Now, when we go into the next category, this is when things kind of get a little bit more confusing. And I want to give a quick definition for something you'll see here. It says IADL, and in the next section it says ADL. So activities of daily living, ADLs, are things that you need to be able to do to live independently. For example, getting yourself dressed in the morning, bathing, grooming, eating, transferring, toileting, etc. IADLs are known as instrumental activities of daily living, and these include things like being able to transport yourself, maybe driving or getting transportation if you're not driving yourself, doing housework, shopping, including shopping for food, cooking the food, managing your finances, managing your medication. So again, these are the things that you need to do in order to live independently. So with that definition, when we look at the category of complex and intermediate, this is someone who has multiple chronic diseases. 2 or more of those IADLs that we just listed, they're not able to complete. And they may have mild to moderate cognitive impairment. So for them, their A1C goal is less than 8%. Rationale behind this: intermediate life expectancy, high treatment burden, hypoglycemia, vulnerability, fall risk. And I'm going to explain a little bit more of this when we move on. So this is just the recap. And the last category is very complex, poor health. This is someone who might be in long-term care. They are at end-stage chronic disease, moderate to severe cognitive impairment. They are unable to do 2 or more of the ADLs we listed. And for that category, we really avoid reliance on A1C, and we are focused on glucose control with the goal of avoiding hypoglycemia, low blood sugars, rationale, limited life expectancy, and benefit uncertain based on the research. Now that I've explained that table, here is a take-home message that I really want to emphasize. Turning 65, simply being an older adult, doesn't automatically mean that your A1 goal should be higher. Now, these guidelines, they are created for healthcare professionals, but it's also very educational for individuals, for caregivers, for so many different people who are looking at this data. So we don't just look at it and say, oh, age 65 and up, you are an older adult, automatically we're going to move you into these categories. So I had a little picture that I used AI to create that hopefully explains things a little bit better. And this is kind of breaking down this category we've been talking about with aging, with older adults, thinking of older adults in 3 different categories. So the first category is the older adult who is active and healthy. You are independent. You either live by yourself, you might be living in a senior living facility, but you are independent. You're taking care of yourself. You're active. You're healthy. You are, out there living your life, taking care of yourself. I will say, if you're an older adult watching this, I would say a majority of you are actually in the active and healthy category. Next, we have the category of complex needs. So this is the older adult who may need help with daily activities. They have multiple medical conditions. They might have a caregiver, someone to help them around the house. They have a lot more complex needs. The final one is advanced illness and end of life. So this is someone who's getting close to the end of their time on this earth. Really, our focus with all healthcare, including nutrition, is focus on comfort, quality of life, and dignity. So I hope that this picture kind of paints like, okay, these are very different categories of older adults. And again, you might be watching this as an older adult, but you also might be watching this as a caregiver, someone who is providing care to someone who's maybe in the more complex or advanced stage of illness in life. So let's pull these little pictures back into the guidelines. So our first example is someone who's healthy, independent. Let's say they're 70 years old, 75 years old. They're living independently. They're cognitively intact. They're exercising on a regular basis, or at least moving their body. They're managing their medications themselves. They're taking care of their meals independently, shopping, preparing meals. They might have a few chronic conditions. But with them, we have a little bit more of a stringent A1C goal, and that's why it is the less than 7 to 7.5%. A little bit more wiggle room as we age than younger, but again, everyone is individualized. That's why I always say, talk to your doctor. Now, next on the list is our example number 2, someone with complex health needs. So let's give this example here. Maybe this is an 82-year-old woman with complex health needs, multiple chronic illnesses, maybe some functional limitations, maybe needs assistance with medications, shopping, meal preparation. So now we're balancing glycemic control against things like getting a low blood sugar, falling, the treatment burden, etc., which is why we give a little bit more leniency to say their A1C goal should be less than 8%. So it goes a little higher. Now, our last example here, we'll say this is a frail 90-year-old with advanced dementia and long-term care. So with this individual, they are completely dependent for their activities of daily living. They have limited life expectancy, say they're on hospice. Perhaps they have very poor dietary intake, or maybe they're experiencing unintentional weight loss. And now our clinical priorities look very different, which is why we are avoiding reliance on A1C and really focusing on that glucose control to avoid the low blood sugars. So A1C goals are different for older adults. We have guidelines as clinicians that guide us, but there's a reason behind this, and it is because of what the science and the research shows us. But we also know that just because you're over age 65, it doesn't mean all people are treated individualized, which is why that table that I was sharing from the American Diabetes Association breaks it down into 3 different categories. So I hope that having this visual helps you to kind of see like, okay, this makes sense. Someone who's active and healthy versus someone who's a little bit more complex versus more, getting close to to end of life on why our A1C goals might be different. Now, my number one take-home message here, I've said it multiple times, but talk to your doctor about the right A1C goal for you. I hope that this video was educational. I hope that you got something out of it today. Go ahead and click the subscribe button, like this video, comment, let me know your thoughts. But thank you so much for being here. I'm grateful that so many of you are seeing this content. I have a podcast called The Geriatric Dietitian. It's found on all the major podcast platforms, wherever you might listen. And I am dropping the videos here on YouTube every Tuesday. So I hope to continue to provide educational content that helps you better to understand nutrition with healthy aging. Thanks so much for being here and have a great day.